To demonstrate what I'm describing, let's walk through the following example in R. Here we have a dataset related to baseball that I've scraped from baseballreference.com. Later in the course, we're going to learn how to do web scraping with R. What we're looking at is the year-end ranking of each baseball team over the course of the last 60 years. And we're going to review this code more in depth a bit later on, but let's just visualize this data for now. Here's the data set that we want to visualize. From this, we can explore the history of each team. We might want to know which teams are consistently good or bad, or which teams have drastic and long-term shifts in their success rate. Visualizing these rankings over time for each team is a great way to explore these kinds of questions. So let's think about how we might visualize this with static graphics using ggplot2. We can plot the history of each team, and then represent each team as a separate line plot with a different color. Let's go ahead and load ggplot2 and plot our data with the x-axis as year and the y-axis as rank, and then we'll color by team. If this code is unfamiliar to you, we recommend you go back to our Introduction to R and Visualization course for a refresher. We see that the result is very messy and is nearly useless for the questions we had in the first place. There's simply too much going on in this plot. So maybe we break this plot into lots of subplots using faceting, and we'll see how that looks. We just add the facet wrap line at the bottom and specify that we want to do the faceting by team. So this helps, but now each plot is small and hard to see. And further, it's difficult to make direct comparisons between teams. Our eyes have to do an awful lot of scanning back and forth in order to make the comparisons that we're interested in. So maybe we'll show just a couple teams so that we can make those comparisons quickly and easily. For example, let's take just the Chicago Cubs and the Boston Red Sox. We subset out those two teams with the which function, and we specify that we only want the rows with either of those names in them. And now we graph it with the same code we used previously. This certainly helps, and we can easily make direct comparisons between the Cubs and the Red Sox and see how they compared over time. This plot is clean and not too busy. This is much improved. But what if our viewer doesn't care about the Cubs or the Red Sox? And think about all the data we had that we're now leaving behind and not using at all. This isn't a very good way to convey the whole data set. So we might think, so what? What could we possibly do differently? What other options do we possibly have? Well, here's a demonstration of how we might approach this problem using the rcharts library that we'll learn about later. Don't worry about the code for now, as we're going to go over this in more depth later. Here's what the graph would look like. Instead of a static graphic, we've created a small website for an interactive experience. With this, we create a clean chart and a simple visual, and we utilize click-based interactivity to allow the user to explore whatever story interests them. In this way, we encode all the data we have, but present it in a simple way that is driven by viewer engagement. All this interactivity we'll be utilizing is based upon web browsers. Web pages today are dynamic. They constantly update as the relevant information changes. Think about your Twitter feed, for example. It's dynamically created every time you look at it. It was never written down beforehand. All of this is empowered by HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. These are the languages that web developers use to build the complex, interactive web experiences that we have every day. Today's web pages are highly interactive through click, hover, drag, and other modes. In fact, click-based interactivity and exploration have become a very common component of how we interact with websites. This has become an intuitive way that we interact with web-driven graphics and the entire digital world. In the last couple of years, there's been an explosion in the R community centered around these web-based interactive technologies. Many R packages have been developed that allow us to gain the benefits of these web-based tools. Here are just a few examples of what's out there today. In this course, we'll be learning about just these kinds of things. Here's an example of some of the kinds of visualizations we're going to be building throughout the course. We're going to be able to leverage these powerful technologies, but we don't need to learn any HTML or JavaScript in the process. We're going to be doing all of this using only R.